Sarah Matthews stood motionless in her driveway, staring at the large wooden garage door that hadn't been opened in 6 months. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered structure, and a gentle breeze rustled the overgrown bushes beside it. This garage had been her husband Tom's sanctuary for over 3 decades of marriage, and now, at age 58, she was about to enter it alone for the first time. The old key felt heavy in her trembling hand. Sarah could still picture Tom's smiling face every time he disappeared into this space, emerging hours later with sawdust in his silver hair and that satisfied look he always wore after completing a project. He'd spent countless weekends there, the sound of his power tools and classic rock radio station becoming the soundtrack of their married life. Looking at the garage now, memories flooded back like a tidal wave. There was the time their children, Jenny and Michael, had helped Tom build their first bicycles in there. The countless Christmas seasons when he'd secretly crafted handmade gifts for the family. Even the afternoon when he'd taught their teenage son how to change a car's oil, a lesson that had ended in laughter and motor oil stains that never quite came out of the concrete floor. Sarah wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself, though the spring morning wasn't particularly cold. The neighbor's cat, Mr. Whiskers, rubbed against her legs, bringing her back to the present moment. She hadn't realized she'd been standing there for nearly 20 minutes, lost in thought. "It's just a garage," she whispered to herself, but they both knew it wasn't true. This was the last space that truly belonged to Tom, exactly as he'd left it. Opening that door meant confronting the reality of his absence in a way she hadn't been ready to face until now. The last time she'd seen Tom in his garage, he'd been organizing his tools with unusual determination. It was just 3 days before the heart attack that took him from her. He'd been acting slightly strange that week, more deliberate in his actions, as if he knew something she didn't. Now, looking back, Sarah wondered if he'd somehow sensed what was coming. "Sarah, promise me something," he'd said that day, putting down his wrench and looking at her with those warm brown eyes she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "If anything ever happens to me, wait 6 months before you come in here. Not a day sooner." When she'd asked why, he just smiled that mysterious smile of his and said, "Trust me on this one, sweetheart." At the time, she laughed it off as one of Tom's peculiar requests. He'd always had a flair for the dramatic, often turning simple tasks into elaborate adventures, especially for their grandchildren. But now, standing here exactly 6 months after his passing, his request felt heavier with meaning. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward. The key slid into the lock with a familiar click. It was the same sound she'd heard thousands of times before, but today it seemed to echo through the quiet morning air. Her heart pounded as she turned it slowly to the right. The mechanism groaned from months of disuse. Sarah paused, her hand resting on the cool metal handle. Through the small windows at the top of the garage door, she could see dust particles dancing in the rays of sunlight that managed to penetrate the grimy glass. What would she find inside? Would everything be exactly as he'd left it, like a museum of their shared life? Or would the space feel empty now, void of his vibrant presence? A cardinal landed on the nearby bird feeder, the one Tom had built last spring, its bright red feathers a stark contrast against the weathered wood. Sarah remembered how proud he'd been of that simple project, how he'd spent hours watching the birds come and go from his workshop window while he worked on other projects. "Okay, Tom," she said softly, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "I've waited just like you asked. I hope you knew what you were doing." With one final deep breath, Sarah pushed up on the handle. The garage door began to rise, creaking and groaning, revealing inch by inch the space that had been sealed away since that terrible February morning. The familiar scent of sawdust, motor oil, and Tom's favorite coffee blend wafted out, and Sarah felt her knees weaken slightly. As natural light flooded into the garage for the first time in 6 months, she took her first step inside, unaware that she was about to discover something that would change everything. The memory of Tom's last week alive played vividly in Sarah's mind as she stood inside the garage doorway. It had been an ordinary Monday morning when Tom first mentioned feeling unusually tired. At breakfast, he pushed his scrambled eggs around his plate instead of devouring them as he usually did. "I think I'll spend some extra time in the garage this week," he told her, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't recognized at the time. "There are a few things I need to finish up." Sarah had simply nodded, used to his dedication to his projects. Now, she wished she paid more attention to the subtle changes in his behavior. Throughout that week, Tom had spent every spare moment in his garage. Sarah would bring him glasses of lemonade, his favorite drink, and find him sorting through old photographs, organizing tools, or writing in a notebook he quickly tucked away whenever she appeared. When she'd asked about his unusual activity, he'd simply smile and say, "Just getting things in order, sweetheart." On Thursday evening, just 3 days before the heart attack, Tom had called Sarah into the garage. It was unusual. He rarely invited her into his workspace. The setting sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across his workbench. He cleared a space among his tools and sat her down on his favorite stool. "Sarah," he'd said, taking her hands in his calloused ones, "we need to talk about something important." His eyes had been serious, but gentle. "I need you to make me a promise." Sarah had noticed how pale he looked, how his usually steady hands trembled slightly. "What kind of promise?" she'd asked, trying to keep her voice light despite the growing concern in her chest. "If anything ever happens to me," he'd said slowly, "I need you to wait exactly 6 months before coming into this garage. Not 5 months, not 7, exactly 6. He'd squeezed her hands tighter, his wedding ring catching the fading sunlight. Confused and slightly frightened by his seriousness, Sarah had tried to joke. "Tom Matthews, what are you up to? You're not building a time machine in here, are you?" He'd laughed, but it hadn't reached his eyes. "Nothing that exciting. Just promise me, Sarah. 6 months. There's something you'll need to find, but it has to be at the right time." "Tom, you're scaring me," she'd admitted. "Are you feeling okay? Should we call Dr. Peterson?" He'd shaken his head, pulling her into a tight hug. "I'm fine, honey. Just promise me, please." Sarah had promised, more to ease his mind than anything else. They'd gone inside afterward, had dinner, and watched their favorite TV show. Everything had seemed normal again. 3 days later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Tom had gone to get the newspaper from the driveway. Sarah had been making coffee when she heard the thud. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. Tom's heart, which had given so much love throughout his life, had finally given out. The weeks that followed were a blur of funeral arrangements, well-meaning casseroles from neighbors, and visits from their children. Jenny had stayed for 2 weeks, helping her mother sort through paperwork and adjust to the silence of the house. Michael had driven up from Boston every weekend for a month, fixing things around the house just like his father had taught him. But no one had entered the garage. Sarah had been adamant about honoring Tom's last request, though she couldn't explain why to her concerned children. "Dad made me promise," was all she would say when they suggested cleaning it out. Now, standing in the garage doorway exactly 6 months later, Sarah understood why Tom had been so insistent about the timing. The morning light illuminated dust particles floating in the air, making them look like falling stars. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. His coffee mug still sat on the workbench, a ring of brown staining its bottom. His reading glasses lay folded beside his favorite woodworking magazine. But there was something different too, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. The space felt charged with purpose, as if Tom had carefully arranged everything with this moment in mind. As Sarah took another step inside, her eyes adjusting to the dimness, she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. A small yellow post-it note stuck to Tom's tool cabinet, written in his familiar handwriting. "Start here, sweetheart." Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the yellow post-it note on Tom's tool cabinet. The paper felt delicate between her fingers, as if it held not just Tom's message but a piece of him too. The familiar scent of the garage, a mixture of wood shavings, motor oil, and that peculiar metallic smell of old tools, wrapped around her like a comfort blanket. "Start here, sweetheart." The note read in Tom's distinctive handwriting, slightly slanted to the right as always. Below these words was a small arrow pointing to the cabinet's handle. Sarah paused, taking in the massive red tool cabinet that had been Tom's pride and joy. He bought it at an auction 15 years ago, spending an entire weekend restoring its scratched surface to a gleaming cherry red. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pulled open the top drawer. The perfectly organized rows of screwdrivers, each one arranged by size and type, brought fresh tears to her eyes. Tom had always been meticulous about his tools, often joking that he could find any screwdriver in his collection blindfolded. Inside the drawer, she found another yellow post-it note. "Remember our first date? Check the shelf where I keep that special item." Sarah smiled despite her tears. Of course, she remembered their first date. How could she forget? Tom had taken her to a local carnival, and when it started raining, it sought shelter in his father's old garage. That's where he'd first shown her how to use a lathe, creating a small wooden heart that she still kept in her jewelry box. He'd stored that old lathe on the top shelf of his wall unit. Moving carefully through the cluttered space, Sarah made her way to the large wooden shelving unit that covered the far wall. Sunlight streaming through the dusty windows caught the collection of old projects, spare parts, and mysterious boxes Tom had accumulated over the years. The lathe sat exactly where it always had, but next to it was something new, a small wooden box she'd never seen before. Her heart pounding, Sarah reached for the box. It was lightweight, made of polished maple with intricate carvings around its edges. She recognized Tom's handiwork immediately. He'd always had a way of making wood look like it was flowing like water. As she lifted the box, another note fell from underneath it. "Open me." Inside the box, Sarah found an old photograph she hadn't seen in years. It showed her and Tom on their wedding day, but not the formal portrait everyone knew. This was a candid shot taken by her sister. They were both laughing as Tom tried to fix the flower that had fallen from Sarah's hair. Beneath the photo was another note. "You were so beautiful that day. Still are. Now look behind my old fishing gear." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked toward the corner where Tom kept his fishing equipment. They'd spent countless summer weekends by the lake, Tom teaching their children how to bait hooks and cast lines, while Sarah read books in the shade. The collection of fishing rods stood propped against the wall, gathering dust. Moving aside the tangle of fishing lines and tackle boxes, Sarah discovered a small shelf she'd never noticed before. On it sat a leather-bound journal with Tom's initials embossed on the cover. Her breath caught in her throat as she picked it up, another note fluttering to the floor. "I've been keeping this for years. Start at the beginning." The morning light had grown stronger now, filling the garage with a warm glow. Sarah found Tom's old chair, the comfortable one he'd placed by his workbench for long projects, and sat down. The leather journal felt warm in her hands, as if it held all the love and memories of their life together. Opening the first page, Sarah gasped. There, in Tom's neat handwriting, was a date from 33 years ago, the day they first met. Below it, he'd written, "Met Sarah Johnston today. She has the most beautiful smile I've ever seen. I'm going to marry that girl someday." Tears flowed freely now as Sarah realized what Tom had done. This wasn't just a journal. It was their love story, written from his perspective over all their years together. As she turned to the next page, she noticed something else tucked into the back of the journal. What looked like a hand-drawn map of the garage with certain areas marked with X's and numbers. Looking up from the journal, Sarah surveyed the garage with new eyes. This was just the beginning, she realized. Tom had left her not just memories, but a journey to take. Sarah spread the hand-drawn map on Tom's workbench, her fingers tracing the careful lines he'd drawn. The garage layout was perfectly captured, but what caught her attention were the numbers scattered across the page. Each number corresponded to a specific spot in the garage, with tiny notes written beside them in Tom's precise handwriting. The first number, 1987, was marked near his old record player. Sarah walked over to the dusty turntable that still held the last vinyl Tom had played, their favorite Elvis album. Behind it, she found a small envelope marked with the same number. Inside was a pressed flower, a daisy, now brown with age, with a note. "From the field where we had our first picnic." Her hands shaking slightly, Sarah checked the map again. The number 1989 pointed to a spot behind Tom's collection of vintage car manuals. Moving the books aside carefully, she discovered another envelope. This one contained their first house key, attached to a note reading, "Remember how the front door stuck every time it rained? I secretly loved having to help you push it open." As Sarah moved through the garage, following Tom's numbered trail, she began to notice a pattern. Each number wasn't random, they represented a year in their life together, and each hidden item corresponded to a significant moment from that year. The discovery made her heart race. Tom hadn't just left her a simple scavenger hunt, he created a timeline of their love story. 1992 led her to a baby booty tucked inside his old toolbox, the year their daughter Jenny was born. 1995 revealed Michael's first baseball, hidden in a coffee can filled with old screws. 2001 guided her to their 20th anniversary photo, carefully preserved in a waterproof sleeve behind his paint cans. The morning light shifted as Sarah worked her way through the years, each discovery bringing fresh tears and smiles. Tom had thought of everything. He'd even left small explanations for why he'd chosen each item, his words bringing every memory back to life with vivid clarity. Near his workbench, she found a letter from 2010 when Jenny had gotten married. "Watching you help our daughter into her wedding dress," Tom had written, "I fell in love with you all over again. You are both so beautiful, and I was the proudest man alive." As she followed the trail, Sarah noticed something else. Certain tools in Tom's collection had small marks on them, tiny dots of different colors that she'd never seen before. When she lined them up according to the marks, they formed an arrow pointing toward the back corner of the garage. The mat showed a large X in that corner, marked with the number 2024, the current year. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Whatever Tom had planned, this seemed to be the final destination. But as she moved toward the corner, something else caught her eye. On Tom's favorite hammer, the one he'd used to build their back deck, she noticed a series of numbers etched into the handle. They weren't years this time, or what looked like measurements or coordinates. Similar markings appeared on other tools nearby, his level, his favorite screwdriver, even his ancient tape measure. Sarah grabbed a piece of paper from Tom's workbench and began writing down the numbers, her mind racing. Tom had always loved puzzles and codes. During their early dating years, he'd sometimes leave her encrypted messages that would take days to solve. Could these numbers be another puzzle? Looking back at the map, she noticed something she'd missed before. In the very corner, written in tiny letters, were the words, "The numbers are the key, sweetheart." Just like that mystery novel you love, the one with the secret library. Sarah's eyes widened. The novel Tom mentioned was one she'd read countless times, where the protagonist had to solve a series of numerical riddles to find a hidden room. Was that what Tom had done here? Created a puzzle that would lead to something hidden in the garage. Standing in the middle of the space, surrounded by 37 years of memories and Tom's carefully planned clues, Sarah felt overwhelmed. But she'd also felt something else, excitement. Tom had always known how to make even ordinary moments feel like adventures. And here he was, even after his passing, creating one last mystery for her to solve. Taking a deep breath, Sarah picked up the paper with the numbers and looked around the garage with renewed purpose. Whatever Tom had hidden, whatever message or surprise he'd left for her to find, she was determined to solve his puzzle. After all, she thought with a small smile, they'd always made the best team. Sarah sat at Tom's workbench, spreading out all the numbers she'd collected from his tools. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the garage windows as she arranged them in different combinations, trying to make sense of the pattern. Tom had always said that every puzzle had a key. You just had to find the right way to look at it. The numbers seemed random at first. 12.5, 8.3, 15.7, and so on. But as she studied them more closely, Sarah noticed something peculiar. Each tool with markings corresponded to a specific year in their lives, just like the hidden mementos she'd found earlier. "Think, Sarah," she whispered to herself, drumming her fingers on the workbench. "What would Tom want me to remember?" Her eyes drifted to their wedding photo, still sitting out from her earlier discovery, and suddenly it clicked. These weren't just random numbers, they were measurements. Each one represented the distance from a particular point in the garage. But distance to what? Sarah stood up, grabbing Tom's old tape measure. If these numbers were distances, she needed a starting point. She began with the hammer marked 12.5, measuring from where it had been stored. The measurement led her to the center of the garage. The next tool, a wrench marked 8.3, created another line when measured. Where the lines intersected, Sarah found a small mark on the floor she'd never noticed before. Excitement building, she continued with each measurement. Tool by tool, number by number, a pattern emerged. The intersecting lines formed an arrow, pointing directly at the back wall of the garage. But this section of wall looked different from the rest. The pegboard covering it seemed newer, less weathered. Sarah's hands trembled as she approached the wall. Running her fingers along the edge of the pegboard, she felt a slight gap. Her heart racing, she pressed gently, and the panel moved. Behind it was a small door, built seamlessly into the wall. "Oh, Tom," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "You clever man." Next to the hidden door was one final note. "You always said I was full of surprises. Remember our first anniversary, when I built you that secret jewelry box? Same mechanism, sweetheart. Sarah smiled through her tears. She remembered that box perfectly. It had taken her hours to figure out how to open it. Tom had designed it with a special sequence of moves. Push right, slide left, then press the center twice. With trembling fingers, she applied the same sequence to the door. There was a soft click, and the door swung open. Inside, she found a small room she never knew existed. Tom had somehow carved out a space behind the garage wall, roughly the size of a large closet. Motion-activated lights flickered on, revealing walls covered with photos, hundreds of them, documenting their entire life together. Here was their first Christmas as a couple, Sarah wearing that horrible sweater Tom had given her. There were pictures of Jenny's first steps, Michael's high school graduation, family vacations, and quiet moments at home. Each photo had a date and a small note in Tom's handwriting, describing not just what had happened, but how he felt in that moment. In the center of the room stood a small table with a leather-bound book. Unlike the journal she found earlier, this one was titled The Future. Opening it, Sarah found letters addressed to different dates. Future birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries. Tom had written messages for her to read on specific occasions, ensuring his love and wisdom would continue to guide her even after he was gone. But what caught her eye was an envelope sitting on top of the book, marked Read Me First. Inside, she found a letter written in Tom's familiar handwriting. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, you've solved my puzzle, just like I knew you would. You always were the smartest person I knew, even if you didn't always believe it yourself. I created this space to hold our memories, more importantly, to remind you that our love story doesn't end with my passing. Every photo here, every letter I've written for the future, carries a piece of my heart. Remember how you used to say I was the keeper of our memories? Now it's your turn. There's space on these walls for new photos, new memories you'll make with our children and grandchildren. Keep adding to our story, sweetheart. All my love, Tom. Sarah sank into the chair Tom had placed in the corner, clutching the letter to her chest. In this hidden room, surrounded by the carefully preserved fragments of their life together, she felt Tom's presence stronger than ever. But there was still more to discover. She could feel it. Sarah spent nearly an hour in Tom's hidden room, absorbing every detail of the photographs and reading his notes. As she wiped away tears, her eyes caught something she hadn't noticed before, a small arrow drawn in the corner of the last photograph, pointing downward. Looking down, she noticed a subtle seam in the floorboards. Her heart racing, Sarah got on her knees and ran her fingers along the seam. There was a slight difference in the wood grain, forming what appeared to be a perfect square. In the corner, she found a small indentation just big enough for her finger. When she pressed it, there was a soft click, and a section of the floor lifted slightly. Using both hands, Sarah carefully raised the hidden panel. Beneath it was a shallow space, and inside lay a folded piece of paper and a single brass key. The paper contained a simple message in Tom's handwriting. Behind the large tool cabinet, our anniversary date is the combination. Sarah stepped out of the hidden room and approached the massive tool cabinet that had always dominated the far wall of the garage. She'd always assumed it was bolted to the wall. That's what Tom had told her. Now, looking more carefully, she noticed it was mounted on barely visible wheels. Gathering her strength, Sarah pushed against the cabinet. It moved surprisingly easily, revealing another door built into the wall. This one had a combination lock, just as Tom's note had suggested. With trembling fingers, Sarah dialed in their anniversary, 11 to 2287. The lock clicked open. Behind this door was yet another hidden space, but much larger than the photo room, almost like a small workshop. The lights flickered on automatically, revealing Tom's most private sanctuary. The walls were lined with woodworking tools she'd never seen before, and the air smelled strongly of fresh-cut wood and varnish. In the center of the space stood something covered with a white sheet. Sarah approached it slowly, her heart pounding. As she pulled away the sheet, she gasped. There, gleaming in the light, was the most beautiful oak chest she'd ever seen. The chest was made of rich cherry wood, polished to a deep shine. Intricate carvings covered every surface, roses and vines that seemed to flow across the wood like water. Sarah recognized Tom's signature style immediately. He'd always had a way of making wood look alive. On the lid was an inlaid design made from different colored woods, two hands clasped together, surrounded by a heart. Below it were their initials and wedding date, the inlay work so precise it looked like it had been painted rather than pieced together. A note was propped against the chest. I started this the day after my diagnosis. The doctor gave me a year, but I was determined to finish this for you. Open it, sweetheart. Sarah lifted the lid carefully. The hinges moved silently, testament to Tom's perfectionism. The inside was lined with cedar, and the scent brought fresh tears to her eyes. It was the same wood Tom had used to build their first crib when Jenny was on the way. The chest was filled with carefully wrapped packages, each labeled with dates and occasions. For Jenny's next baby, for Michael's promotion, for our 40th anniversary. Tom had thought of everything, preparing gifts and messages for future milestones he knew he wouldn't live to see. But what caught Sarah's attention was a small wooden box nestled in one corner. Unlike the other packages, this one was marked "Open Now." Inside, she found Tom's wedding ring and a note. My dear Sarah, this chest represents all my hopes for your future, our family's future. Each gift inside carries a piece of my heart, crafted in the quiet hours while you slept. I poured all my love into every carving, every joint, every finish. My ring belongs in here now, not as an ending, but as a reminder that love doesn't stop with death. It lives on in the things we create, the memories we share, and the legacy we leave behind. There's one more secret to this chest. Look closely at the left side panel. Remember how you always said I was too clever for my own good? Well, I saved my best trick for last. Forever yours, Tom. Sarah ran her hand along the left panel of the chest, feeling for anything unusual. As she pressed one of the carved roses, she heard a faint click. A small compartment popped open, revealing something that made her heart stop. Inside the secret compartment, Sarah found dozens of envelopes, each one sealed with red wax bearing Tom's initials. They were arranged chronologically, starting with the coming month and extending years into the future. Her hands shook as she lifted out the first envelope, marked, "For the first holiday without me." Carefully breaking the wax seal, Sarah unfolded the letter inside. Tom's familiar handwriting filled the page. My dearest Sarah, I know this first holiday season will be the hardest. The empty chair at the table, the Christmas carols we used to dance to in the kitchen, the traditions we built over 37 years, they'll all feel different now. But remember how we always said love is stronger than distance. Death is just another kind of distance, sweetheart. I've asked Jenny to make sure she brings the kids over. Our grandchildren's laughter has always been the best medicine for a heavy heart. And don't let Michael work through the holidays like he always tries to do. Remind him that family comes first, just like we taught him. Most importantly, don't pack away our traditions just because I'm not there. Put up that ridiculous inflatable Santa I bought on clearance 10 years ago. Make your famous sugar cookies. Tell our grandchildren the story of how we met, especially the embarrassing part about how I spilled hot chocolate all over myself trying to impress you. I'm with you in every memory, every tradition, every moment of joy. All my love, Tom. Sarah wiped her eyes and looked through more envelopes. There were letters for every important occasion she could imagine. Birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, weddings yet to come. Some were addressed to her, others to their children and grandchildren. Tom had thought of everything. One envelope caught her attention. For Jenny when the baby comes. Their daughter hadn't even announced a pregnancy yet, but somehow Tom had known. He'd always said Jenny had that same glow her mother had when she was expecting Michael. Another envelope read for Michael's wedding day. Their son, always focused on his career, had recently started dating someone special. Tom had seen that coming too. As Sarah examined the letters more closely, she noticed they weren't just random messages. Tom had created a sort of timeline, weaving together the future milestones of their family's life. Each letter connected to the others, building a tapestry of love and guidance that would unfold over years to come. In a larger envelope marked Family History, she found detailed stories about Tom's parents and grandparents, family recipes passed down through generations, and old photographs she'd never seen before. He documented their entire family tree, complete with funny anecdotes and precious memories that might otherwise have been lost to time. There were also practical letters. When the roof needs replacing, if you decide to sell the house, when it's time to retire. Each one contained not just emotional support but practical advice drawn from Tom's years of experience. He even included contact information for trusted contractors and financial advisors. But what touched Sarah most deeply were the simple letters marked, "For when you miss me most." These weren't dated. Tom knew grief doesn't follow a schedule. Inside one, she read, "Sarah, if you're reading this, you're having one of those days where the world feels too quiet without me. I wish I could wrap you in my arms right now, dance with you in the kitchen like we used to, hear your laugh echo through the house. Remember that afternoon at the lake when we got caught in the rain? You were so worried about your new dress getting ruined, but then you looked at me and started laughing. We danced in the rain until we were soaked to the bone. That's how I'll always remember you. Beautiful, joyful, embracing life's unexpected moments. You're stronger than you know, sweetheart. And on days when you don't feel strong, that's okay too. Our love story isn't over. It's just changing chapters. Forever yours, Tom." Sarah carefully returned the letters to their compartment, except for the one marked for the coming month. Each envelope represented a piece of Tom's heart, a bridge between past and future, a reminder that love endures beyond physical presence. As she sat surrounded by Tom's final gifts, the hope chest, the letters, the hidden rooms full of memories, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The crushing weight of grief began to transform into something else. A deep gratitude for the man who had loved her so completely that he found a way to keep caring for his family even after he was gone. But there was still one final envelope to open, larger than the others, marked simply, "The last letter. Read me last." Sarah held the final envelope in her hands, taking a deep breath before carefully breaking the wax seal. The letter inside was longer than the others, written on several pages of Tom's favorite stationery, the cream-colored paper she'd given him for their last Christmas together. "My beloved Sarah, if you're reading this, you found everything I prepared for you in our garage. You followed my trail of clues, discovered our memory room, and found the hope chest I spent my final months creating. Now it's time for me to explain everything. Last year, when Dr. Peterson told me about my heart condition, I knew our time together would be shorter than we planned. But I refused to let that be the end of our story. I started spending every free moment in the garage, not just working with my hands, but preserving our love story for you and our family. The numbered tools that led you here, each one represents a year that shaped us. The hidden room of photographs, every picture was chosen because it captured a moment when I fell in love with you all over again. The hope chest, each carving tells a piece of our story. The roses for your garden, the vines for how our love grew, the clasped hands for our promise to each other. But here's what I really want you to know, Sarah. All these gifts, these letters, these hidden treasures, they're not just about remembering the past. They're about helping you move forward. I know you, sweetheart. You're probably worried that moving forward means forgetting me. It doesn't. Inside the hope chest, beneath the false bottom, yes, there's one more secret compartment. Just pull the ribbon in the back left corner. You'll find a key to a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Inside are some investments I made over the years, saved specially for this moment. Use it to travel, to spoil our grandchildren, to finally take those art classes you've always dreamed about. Live, Sarah. Really live. I've also left letters for Jenny and Michael about this. They know to check in on you, not because you need taking care of. You've always been the strongest one in our family, because I want them to share in these discoveries with you. Our love story belongs to them too. Remember how we always talked about writing our own story? Well, I've left plenty of blank pages in the family history book. Fill them with new adventures. Add photos of graduations I'll miss, weddings I can't attend, and grandchildren I'll never hold. Make our story grow. The garage is yours now, Sarah. I know you never felt comfortable in here before, but I hope now you'll see it differently. It's not just my workspace anymore. It's a bridge between what was and what will be. The workbench is solid oak. It'll support whatever dreams you decide to build on it. There's one last thing. In the small wooden box on my workbench, you'll find my grandfather's pocket watch. I've had it repaired and polished. Give it to Michael when the time feels right. And the pearl necklace in the velvet pouch? That's for Jenny. I bought it the day she was born, knowing someday she'd need something old to wear at her wedding. Sarah, my love, my best friend, my heart. Thank you for 37 years of adventures. Thank you for our children, our home, our life. Thank you for every morning I woke up beside you, every laugh we shared, every storm we weathered together. I know there will be hard days ahead, days when grief feels too heavy to bear. On those days, Come to the garage. Sit in our memory room. Open one of my letters. Remember that love doesn't end. It just changes form. You once told me that the best love stories never really end. You were right. Ours continues in every letter I've written, every gift I've made, every memory we've shared. It lives on in Jenny's smile, so much like yours, in Michael's determination, definitely from you, and in the countless ways you've made our family strong. Keep loving. Keep living. Keep adding chapters to our story, and know that wherever you go, whatever you do, my heart goes with you. All my love, for all time. Tom. P.S. Don't forget to check the ribbon in the hope chest. Some dreams are meant to be chased, sweetheart. Chase yours. Sarah lowered the letter, her tears falling onto the paper. But for the first time since Tom's passing, they weren't just tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude, of love, and of hope. Standing in the garage that had become a sanctuary of memories and promises, Sarah felt Tom's presence stronger than ever, not as a ghost of the past, but as a light guiding her toward tomorrow.